I'm Will. I'm an alcoholic. I was very touched before the meeting that people that have known me a long time and are friends and that I respect said some very kind things to me before. And I have to remind myself that what they see is Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I'm not the person I came in. I assure you. If you see, it'd be like people that see me that say, "Oh no, here he comes again." Or more likely they'd say, "Oh no, here she comes again." You know. I've been kept sober by grace since July 18th of 1989. And I'm always grateful to see John P., especially tonight, because he remembers my story much better than I do. So I might ask for a prompt, John. In one of the WAN's noon meetings this week, Patrick chaired, so beautifully as always, and we were talking about miracles, and he reminded us that miracles just didn't start with our recovery. It started a long, long time ago, way before 1935, when Bill met people and people came into his life, and he met Dr. Bob. There's just a succession of miracles that we see going on continuously. I love that analogy. My life before recovery was a nightmare. I was terrified and fearful. The places I was going, the people I was with, the things I was doing, the things they were doing, and never escaping the fear and the mental and emotional torture. I went to, I had a store out in Ennis, and this cowgirl came in one day in cutoffs, work boots, and looked like she'd just gotten off a tractor. She had just gotten off a tractor. And she looked at me and she introduced herself and she said, "Hello, we're going to be friends." And I'm like, probably through gritted teeth, "Oh, yes, we must do lunch." You know, it's like, what is this? And I knew her for quite a while. And we talked and she said, I said, "What are you doing tonight?" She says, "I'm going to a meeting." I said, "Well, I go to a lot of meetings. You know, I'm on the board of this and chairman of that and go to a lot of political things." She said, "No, I'm an alcoholic and I'm going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous." And I said, "Oh, really? My best friend's in AA. You know, I think I'm an alcoholic too." And she was like, "Mm-hmm." You know. So I started with my best friend, Robert, and with Jean, going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, my psychiatrist at that time, I thought, "Okay, Robert, you go to AA. But I know there's some doctor in an expensive suit who'll wave his hands over me and I'll be okay." So he's like, "Okay." But I started going. Now, my psychiatrist just told me, he said, "You're an alcoholic." And I thought, well, the doctor told me I am. So I quit drinking alcohol. So I started sniffing alcohol and popping alcohol and everything. And alcohol in all its many forms. And that really drove me down. So I met the old Central group. I was there one night with Robert. And it was a New Year's Eve, and I had not had a drink of alcohol in 3 years. And they asked, I just, all the other forms, and they asked, is anyone celebrating an anniversary today? So I raised my hand, and I said, I'm Will, and I'm an alcoholic, and I have not had a drink in 3 years. And everybody clapped. I liked that. So I was getting worse, things were getting worse, and Jean was doing the steps at Lambda. And, it was one of those deals, Robert and Jean got together, and they're like, oh, we're going to meet for dinner or coffee or something, and then we're going to go hear Jean speak. Why don't you go with us? So I was going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, very likely stoned. And people that remember Jean Spilsbury, in the 4 Tuesday nights she spoke, she said a lot of stuff. But the one thing I heard, Grace, was you never have to live the way you've been living ever again. It seemed like that's all she said all of the 4 times. And I kept thinking, I don't have to live like this. I thought, my thinking, that I had a lifetime sentence with no hope of parole, that I had gone too far, I was too dirty, and this is the real prideful part. I felt like I had gone beyond the grace of God and that God was somehow mad at me. Now you keep doing drugs and thinking like that, you can go down pretty fast. That's my story. Oh, they're after me. So I was at I was going to meetings, and Jean says, oh, this birthday night over at the Waxahachie group, we're all going, we're going to call ice cream afterwards or something. Just come on and be with us. And it was that night that I heard the newcomers were picking up their monthly chips. And somehow, Grace broke through my pride, my ego, my alcoholism, my drug addiction. And I heard something. And later that night, I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous for myself. And of course, I'd been going to meetings. I hadn't had a drink in 3 years. And I thought, I would talk and give my sobriety date, 3 years before. And they kept saying, keep coming back. Oh, they understand what a treat it is for them, for me to be here in the little group in Ennis. And the man with the longest sobriety in the group, he had 10 years at that time. And he kept, every time I'd speak, he'd say, oh, keep coming back. I thought, even old Tom, knows. So the journey started. I didn't quite know what my sobriety date was. And Robert and Jean kept asking me. And I would give them the date. I had my last drink 3 years before. They didn't say anything. But I started going to meetings here and there in Dallas and in little cities around Ennis. And I realized that July 18th of 89 was my date. And I got honest. And it seems to me in Alcoholics Anonymous, after being with you a while, that the river of sobriety just flows along. We go over the rapids, and then we just jump in on a certain day, and we all just then float along together. Everybody has a date. Well, I think it's about 3 weeks later, I had a month. And I knew something was happening. And I picked up a desire chip. You know, it's a little hard to do when you've been announcing how sober you are. But I did. I picked up a chip, Desire chip. We jokingly often call it a key out of hell. For me, it was. Later that month, or whenever it was, I picked up a 30-day chip. I had never, in all these years, ever picked up a chip that meant more to me. Because it was my chip, my date, my commitment. I wasn't running a contest with Robert, who'd been sober a while. And it started, that bit of honesty. Well, there had been a time in my life when I was 33 that a doctor had told me several years earlier that I shouldn't drink. It was harming my heart. So, of course, 12 years later, I quit drinking. And I had bought a little piece of the family business. And things were really good. Probably it was just like my last golden year. And I lost all my extra weight. And, I lived beautifully. I traveled beautifully. And I had, after years of being lonely, I had really a Prince Charming. And a few other guys. No, you too. Okay. Well, I'll tell you about a night that is important in my sobriety, in my story. It was, I think it was probably in the mid-'80s. Prince Charming. It was my birthday. We were celebrating my birthday. And he called the chef at the Mansion restaurant and said, can you prepare this list of, my friends' favorite foods? And he arranged to have a really good table. And it was marvelous. And then after dinner, we went into the bar. And I was getting real uneasy, getting so intimate with someone. In the 80s, we didn't call them character defects. We called them problems of intimacy. We had issues. I'll never forget what Benny used to say. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we do not have issues, we have character defects. And I certainly did. And I picked up a drink that night. And you know what happens after you pick up a drink. It all started getting worse. And it was getting bad. And I kept thinking, what went wrong? How could I have had so much and felt so good and life was great that night? And since then, it's just all turned dark and turned into me. I didn't know anything about really what alcoholism was, but y'all taught me. It's because I picked up a drink that night. And it was just a curiosity in me. What happened? So my prideful and egotistical mind told me, it's because God is mad at you. That is so much pride. Like I said, I felt like I had gone too far. I was too bad. I was too dirty. I would never be clean again. But Jean, finally, I heard from her, you never have to live that way, ever again, one day at a time. And I asked her to be my sponsor. And she told me right off, some very valuable things that are still important to me every day. She looked at me, that look, And she said, if you get drunk, I'm not listening to any excuses, because there's only one reason. You're an alcoholic without a higher power and without a program. It's alcoholism. If you don't want to work your steps, go to meetings, read the book, do your little homework assignments, there's only one reason: alcoholism. She taught me, as did the first parts of the book, the nature of alcoholism. That its ultimate aim was to kill me. It had certainly killed a lot of the joy, happiness, and contentment and peace that I once had. I was starting to learn. And she was tough. A lot of people, we've heard that some people identify their sponsors as Nazi sponsors. She was beyond that. Bruce used to call her Attila. I was physically scared of her. Because she pumped iron, and with those gyms where the big guys worked out, the kind with ragged concrete floors and rusty barbells and all that. And I saw her slug a horse one time that wouldn't load. I mean, well, I did my, worked the steps. And the whole, from when I got my desire chip, my main prayer has always been, please, I don't ever want to go back. Please, it was a nightmare. And the gift to me was I remember how I felt, how I really felt when I was fucked up. The mental and emotional and physical and the terror. I had been scared to go out and to leave my apartment. I was scared to be in my apartment because bad things happened there. It was just, it was a nightmare. I said, please, please. And I would cry all that first year. Just please, please. I never want to go back. So when I got to my fourth step, I think in memory, all the time I actually spent writing over a couple weeks was maybe a total of 12 hours. So like half a day after most of my life building up to this point. I got up from where I was writing, and I went into the kitchen to get a drink of water. But between the table I was at and the kitchen, I fell down on the floor, sobbing and rolling around in tears. Because I could see the difference in how it had been and how it was then. And I went out to her farm that she ran, and we did my fifth step. And as is the recipe, she pointed out to me my character defects and 4 or 5 things that had to change. I don't remember most of them. But I do remember about sex and money, that I needed to get honest in those areas. It drove her nuts that I was still participating in the type of behavior that was very dangerous. It had gotten so bad that my mind could not make myself feel bad about myself, so I would hire people to make me feel, to mistreat me. However you want to interpret that, maybe in many ways, you're right. And, and I was still dialing hustlers. And she said, if you don't stop that, I may have to break one of your fingers. Where's that in the big book? But, I was scared of her, and I would, think, no. And I finally was in too much pain about that. And y'all taught me what the solution was. The steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And because of that, about 30 years ago, I hit bottom with it, my sexual behavior. She was always looking at me and telling me, Will, now that we are in recovery, we don't use anything. I heard that endlessly from her. Well, I participated in that behavior one day, like I said, 30 years ago, and I started coming apart emotionally. I was in therapy many, many hours in just 1 week. And I said, well, was all this because I had drunk too much coffee? She said, if you'd been dipped in caffeine, you wouldn't have been at that point. She said, you were on the end, you were right on the edge of the ledge, falling off. And my mind kind of got very soft, and I was terrified. Because as we hear in how it works, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. And that became my mantra during those months. And I'd say, well, maybe I'm one of those, that I'm too mentally ill or crazy or what. But y'all gave it an out. But if I'm honest, I can turn this around. And I became honest in many ways, especially with friends and with my sponsor and in the groups I went to. And because of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was able to heal from that. And since an honest fourth step, sexual inventory, it's been 30 years that I haven't had to go back to that. Miracle. Like Patrick said in the meeting, it's a succession of miracles. So I wasn't being honest with finances. I was remodeling a couple buildings where my store was, and during construction, 2 of them fell down. That was some news to get early one morning. And the old foundations in the little town had just deteriorated, and 2 buildings fell down. And I got to watch the bulldozer carry away the buildings where my family had a store, I think, for well over 50 years. And I had borrowed so much money from the bank to get all this finished, and they gave it to me. But I started some dishonest practices to keep all those balls up in the air. Well, it got to the point that the business couldn't pay the taxes and could not even pay the interest on how much I had borrowed. It was an untenable situation. You talk about fear driving you to do some dishonest things. We hear in meetings about people that go to prison. I deserved, legally by law, to go to federal prison for grand larceny, overstating my assets. And the more I lied, the worse it got. Till finally, but I had sold my big drunk house and my drunk Jaguar, and I had to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and admit that I'd spent the morning selling art and antiques, jewelry. I'd had an estate sale, a yard sale, a junk sale, and it was never going to be enough. It had been a really good, profitable business. I was set. And the bank told me, we know you've tried. We're not going to slam down on you. We're not going to get you in legal trouble. But we want you to declare bankruptcy so they could write it off. And they said, and we're not going to slam down on you. We're going to let you, we'll help cover whatever checks are out so you won't get sued. And they kept saying, we know you've tried. That I tried, that's Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't want to do that. I called Jean. I said, Jean, I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous and they want me to declare bankruptcy. I can't do that. So she says, what alternative do you have? And I went through that. Like Jean had told me, if I didn't change my ways, I'd lose everything I had. Turned out she was right. The very last day in my business, when that afternoon I was going to turn the keys over to the bank, I was sitting at my desk, and it became so clear to me that everything that had happened was a result of my character defects of pride, fear, over-enlarged ego, that I had been the cause of everything happened. It wasn't the bank. It was myself. That was a very meaningful day to me because, in a way brighter than ever, I really understood the problem of identifying your character defects. And from that day, I think I started on a budget, which actually I'm still on. When the after I'd sold everything I possibly could, and I had been set and had a really comfortable income, after all the little sales I had, one of my sponsees said, well, you can come back to Dallas. You can stay with me till you get a job. Because I'd taken to my old solution to get in bed and pull the covers over my head and think, what am I going to do now? It never worked. It's a great tendency of mine. It doesn't work. And it doesn't work for me, and I've never known it to work for me since. He said, well, you can, come back to Dallas. You can stay with me until you get a job. And I came back to Dallas. I needed a car. So fortunately, John knows this car. He remembers all my cars better than I do. My father was Alzheimer's patient, so I got his old car. It was an old Cutlass that was mostly blue, and would some of the time go in reverse when you needed it to. And that's what it was. And I was grateful for it. Now that was something. I was grateful for it, for this old car. And so all the money I'd been able to salvage from selling things, I had $800 in cash. It wasn't like I had $800 in cash and then other money here because my savings, my retirement, all that had gone. And I came back to Dallas with $800. And I had heard at Alcoholics Anonymous, when you need a job, a good place to get a job is from other members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think the last 4 or 5 jobs I've had have somehow been through someone in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I was over at Ohadas with Ron. And this is the way my princess mind still worked. I said, Ron, you know, this is the really horrible and pathetic thing about all this. I need to go look for a job and look my best, and I can't even afford a facial. That's who I am. That's who I was for sure. Most of you know Ron F. I've sponsored him for 28 years. A big guy, 6'5". He came up over the table and looked at me. You know that look? He said, Will Goldman, you are no longer a princess. You need to go out and get a job. I'm like, yeah, that's a bright day in AA. So I was staying with Ron, and the next morning, I became a Kelly girl or boy, whatever it was. I didn't know anything about a computer or anything because I had people that did that for me, you know. But I got a gig there, and they were very kind to me. They said, well, we realize you don't know how to work this stuff, but we'll let you stay for your tour. And then I got a job cleaning houses. The drunk house I had, it took 2 maids 2 days to clean. Oh, no, I don't want to let go of a dessert ship. I'm always grateful when my knees work. Oh. It's up here if you're shy. Mine was shy, but it still worked. So, through Alcoholics Anonymous, a friend in Alcoholics Anonymous was starting a company. He said, we'll have a job for you. And I didn't know how I was like in one of the lowest rungs of the corporate ladder. But y'all taught me what to do, suit up and show up. So I had just a little bit of money left to buy some starched khakis and starched white shirts. It was, the 80s. So I would go and I would do my best and try my best, and it all turned out. And they gave me a succession of raises because I kept doing as y'all suggested I do. And then the company was bought out twice, and I was kept, and I kept until I got into a senior vice presidency. And when that was over, I got another job through Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a job working at a charity that served people living in poverty. And I really had a whole new feeling of gratitude Never before would I think, when I left the grocery store with a cart of groceries, to say thank you. And I used to believe, well, why shouldn't I have this? And when I opened the refrigerator at home, I would find myself saying thank you. You know, lessons that I've learned along the way. Could someone please tell me what time it is? John?
7:42.
Okay, thank you. One main reason why my life is really good now, that fabulous part of it, I believe, is directly due to sponsoring people. My 30s were wretched. I got sober at 89. My 40s were pretty good. My 50s were great. My 60s were also even more wonderful. My 70s is starting to be magical. A lot of the people in this room and all my sponsees through the years have given me that result, things they've said along the way. My second sponsor was George Stevenson. John kept talking about this guy named George Stevenson. He said, you know him? I'm like, I do not know him. So I was at an AA Christmas party, and I was sitting next to, and I'm like, oh, you're George Stevenson, you're John's sponsor. And he was just talking generally to a few people sitting around, and he said how horrible it would be to be an alcoholic gay man, and your whole life has been the bars and the baths, and you're getting older, and it's all changed. To have to become, to age as a gay man without a spiritual condition. So something clicked in my mind and thought, I hope he'll sponsor me, because that's what I need. I need a spiritual condition to this aging thing. You know, we hear it, it's written in the big book, the great hope of every alcoholic is that one day he'll be able to drink like a normal person, whatever a normal person is. I also think, for myself, perhaps for you too, one of the great hopes is that we can build up years but not get any older. I am here to testify. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. As the meter of my sobriety goes, so does the calendar. I don't believe from where I was to be 72 years old and have such a good life. I mean, just think, if I could drink, I mean, the promise as I get older, I have a lot of friends and something's always going on. I have sponsees and I have all of you in the meetings, and I have a solution that never would have happened unless all the little miracles along the way. I believe, as I said, the fabulousness in my life has come from my wonderful, wonderful sponsees. And I have been given a great gift that some of them, we've been together a long time. James K. for 17 years, Chris F., also known as the other Chris F., for about 20, and Ron for 28. And my fabulous, much younger sponsee, Nick M. They've all been blessings in my life. That's a lesson for me. just keep passing it on, as Jean and George and many of you passed it on to me. I've been, over the summer, I celebrated 32 years of sobriety at Alcoholics Anonymous. But it's only been in this calendar year that I was at a meeting and the chair was talking about humility and pointed out one of the readings. Probably all have heard me mention it in meetings. It's July 11th in Daily Reflection. And it says to the effect, a great change came in our lives when humility was something we really wanted rather than something we must have. And I started working with that and praying for humility, reading about humility, until I found a place I was very, very comfortable. And that was to be led, my happy place, whatever you want to call it, is when I feel connected to my higher power and get out of the way, that instead of my powering through the day, to just be led through the day. That's what we're suggested to do in the big book in the morning, is just do as we think he would have us do. That's become a real gift of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because those of you who have known me a while, my knee-jerk reaction does not come from humility. It comes from ego. But it's starting to change, and I'm grateful. As I said when I started, when I was a newcomer, and still today, and maybe if you're new or wherever you are in sobriety, you never have to live the way you've been living ever again. And that's my wish for all of you. Thanks.